Released between 1991 to 1993 by Beam Software for the NES, NMS Software for the Game Boy, and Tiertex for the Sega Master System and Game Gear, as well as being published by a whole host of companies, we have Star Wars. Based off the events of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, the game has you playing as Luke Skywalker and his friends as they take the fight to the Galactic Empire. Today we'll be looking at all 4 games and what sets them apart from one another. The first question is, are the games any good? Find out in The Good. While the game is a little bit on the short side, it makes up for it in level variety with platforming sections, as well as a first person section when you're in the Millennium Falcon or X-Wing. From Tatooine to the hallways of the Death Star to the Trench Run, the game, with the exception of the Game Gear version, begins with a top-down view of Luke's land speeder as he explores Tatooine, and potentially rescues R2-D2, as well as recruit Obi-Wan Kenobi. Also scattered throughout the caves of Tatooine are shields that Luke can collect, which will make the Millennium Falcon and X-Wing sections of the game significantly easier. The game progresses after recruiting Han Solo at the Mos Eisley Cantina and escaping Tatooine on the Millennium Falcon at Docking Bay 94. After surviving the asteroid field, otherwise known as the remains of Alderaan, our heroes get trapped in the Death Star's tractor beam, and after exploring the hallways, optionally tapping into the Imperial network, they disable the tractor beam and possibly rescuing Princess Leia in the process. After defeating the monster in the trash compactor and escaping in the Millennium Falcon, you fight off TIE fighters until the party reaches Yavin 4 and meets up with the rest of the Rebel Alliance, who then begin their attack on the Death Star. After destroying more TIE fighters in an X-Wing, you finally participate in the Trench Run alone to destroy the Death Star. The game is action-packed from start to finish, and completing tasks in the game goes towards a completion rate, which you can clear if you spend the time doing all the optional things, like collecting the shields and finding or rescuing characters. And believe me, it feels great seeing that 100% completion when you beat it. The Game Gear version, as I mentioned earlier, handles things a bit differently, and in my opinion for the better. While most of the game is identical to the other 3 versions, instead of beginning on Tatooine, you instead begin as Princess Leia on the Tantive 4, fighting Imperial Stormtroopers in order to reach R2-D2 to send the message asking Obi-Wan Kenobi for help. The Tatooine portion of the game is now a side-scrolling section instead of a top-down view of Luke's landspeeder, and you only visit the Sandcrawler and one cave to recruit Obi-Wan before heading straight to Mos Eisley. There's also an expanded scene where Obi-Wan talks to Luke about Mos Eisley prior to entering. The game then continues on as normal until our heroes destroy the tractor beam. The second Death Star hallway section this time resembles more of a prison block, as opposed to a hallway full of lifts. This makes the Game Gear version the most unique version of the game, and with the exception of the Tatooine section, I really like the changes that have been made to the Game Gear adaptation. Graphically, I found that the Master System would have to be the best looking version of the game. In regards to hardware, the Master System was designed to display more colours than the NES and had a larger palette of colours, and from the comparison footage it's also very evident. The Master System version I also felt was much more detailed than the NES version as well. The Game Boy, for what it was capable of, did a very good job, and I think Star Wars is one of the more visually appealing games I've played on the Game Boy. The Game Gear version is very similar to the Master System version, but only the added and revised content for the Game Gear version looks better. Due to the Game Gear having such a small resolution to work with, the overall look of it is more limited than the Master System version. The music of the game was also something I really liked. The Game Boy version of the game is exempt due to its hardware limitations, but I found that the variety of music for the game is pretty good. Han and Leia each have their own theme, Fun fact, the theme used for Han was introduced in The Empire Strikes Back, and the Master System and NES version of the game have tracks that sound better than the other. But given the limitations the Game Boy has, it did a very good job at reproducing most of the music, but unfortunately had to cut some pieces out. The Game Gear has a minor advantage due to having stereo sound available through the use of headphones, otherwise it was the same as the Master System version in terms of how the music sounds, and what it had in it. But with all games, along with the good, we've also got to deal with the bad. I found the difficulty curve in game can be off-putting to some players, especially in the later sections of the game where there are times you're required to make a leap of faith and hope you don't fall into an inescapable pit of spikes. One particular section which did annoy me for a while involves you having to ride some conveyor belts and jump over to a ladder. The following jump off another conveyor belt after that requires you to jump with precise timing, as jumping too early will land you into a pit of spikes that will most likely kill you before you get back to the conveyor belt, or jumping too late will cause you to overshoot the platform, causing you to fall into more spikes. Another thing to note is that Luke swings his lightsaber differently depending on whether you play the Sega or Nintendo versions. The Sega versions he swings it horizontally, and in the Nintendo versions he swings it vertically. The swinging animations for the Nintendo versions are a tad slower, and Luke is much more vulnerable when using the lightsaber in the Nintendo versions. There were also some enemies that can't even be killed by the lightsaber in the Nintendo versions, but the Sega versions I've been able to kill some of them, albeit by weakening them with Han or Leia first. But the same thing can't be done on the Nintendo versions. While there were some difficult sections in this game, and rightly so, there were also parts of the game that I thought were far too easy. A notable one is the Game Boy version of navigating through the asteroid field. All you need to do is simply steer at the bottom right or left corner of the screen until you go past them all. Also in the Game Boy version, I've noticed that you don't take damage if you hit your head on spikes, which is a complete contrast to the other games. The asteroid field, Millennium Falcon and X-Wing sections, with the exception of the trench run, I found were shorter on the Master System version against the other versions too. In regards to difficulty, the Master System and Game Gear versions of the game do fix this by offering two difficulty levels. The Cadet difficulty is a much easier version of the game, featuring less enemies, reduced damage from hazards, and no full damage with a couple of exceptions. The Jedi difficulty on the other hand is the original difficulty of the Nintendo versions. Another thing I didn't like was the overall usefulness of C-3PO. Even the instruction booklet on the Master System version explicitly misleads you about his purpose in game, which is, and I quote, C-3PO displays a message. His comments often steer you in the right direction. While in game he greets you with, "It's not my fault sir, please don't deactivate me." This comment provides absolutely no indication of where or what I need to do next. The only thing he really comments on throughout the game is stating that R2-D2 had wandered off, R2-D2 can be found somewhere in the Sandcrawler, R2-D2 is the property of a General Kenobi, and that Princess Leia is scheduled to be terminated. However, this also contradicts the part in the instruction book about selecting them on the team leader screen, as the dialogue appears in order to progress with the game. With R2-D2 at least he does something useful and provides you with the map of the Death Star hallways, providing you use them to tap into the Imperial network. At least in all versions but the Game Boy version, where after you recruit Obi-Wan, the text simply says, "This is R2-D2. Other than that, there isn't really any other bad things going for these games, so I think it's time for me to give the opinion. While each of the Star Wars games do have their weaknesses, they do have their strengths too, and I had a lot of fun playing all four versions of the game a couple of times each, so I think the replay value of the game is very good too. But if I had to recommend any of them to people, for a challenge, go for the NES version. It's the most difficult and punishing of the four games. It's also the original release of the game, and some of the music of the game is much better than the Master System counterpart. The NES version also features some unique enemies that aren't in any of the other versions either. For a pretty looking game, go with the Master System version. The expanded palette and detailing really brings it out for the system, and being able to choose the difficulty level makes the game much more approachable for all players. For a portable version, go with the Game Boy version. I was pretty surprised how much of the game they were able to fit in, and while the game isn't as difficult as the NES version, it will still keep you on your toes. For the definitive version of the game, go with the Game Gear version. It features additional scenes not present in the other three, as well as redesigning a couple of the segments in the game. It gives you the difficulty options that the Master System version offers, and it's portable. but we all know what the Game Gear's battery life was like. Graphics are a little squished, but it does very well given the Game Gear's resolution. So with that, it's time for my rating. I would give Star Wars on all 4 systems the Force out of 10. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next Infinite Backlog review.